The hunt is on tonight. With quick and free steps, Eileen ran along the edges of the roofs. The many irregular heights and adornments forced her to jump and vault over spikes, towers and steep roofs. But she kept her focus on her mark. The sound of fright, a scream in the night. It could be a beast. Then it was hunter's work. But at times, it was not. At times, it was a whole different kind of beast. She stopped behind a chimney where she saw down in the street, by the light of the street lamp, the source of the distressed sound. A white-clad and hooded figure was in the process of stabbing and sawing into a corpse. The wails of misery were that of a woman, slumped down a bit away from him. The hooded man with a raspy, echoing voice constantly berated her as he further desecrated the carcass of a crumpled man, bearing no sign of the scourge from her point of view. He cursed at her and continuously pointed out that he had been a beast and the church was doing their job. And now Eileen would do hers. She descended to the streets, which did not prompt a change in the woman's behavior, but did make the crazed man stop. He looked up at her, eyes wild, the elegant white robe smeared with blood.
You what?
He breathed heavily and licked away specks of blood around his mouth. She walked calmly towards him.
What a queer garb. And what a monstrous mask. Reminds me of a beast.
He ceased his nonsensical dissection and stood up straight, somewhat crooked. His eyes were indeed filled with that particular madness, only seen in those drunk with blood. He lunged with a jumping swing. She stepped aside and quickly drew her pistol and fired. It grazed his shoulder, not being enough for him to flinch. He screamed as he started to swing his saw cleaver at her. She hit it mid-swing with her blade and fluently separated her weapon in the same motion. Her deflection had thrown him off balance, and she sliced at his leg with a newly plucked blade in her left hand as she spun around behind him. He leapt forward and away from her, not perturbed by the shallow bleeding wound.
Stop! By the gods, stop!
From nowhere, two white-garbed hunters with black shawls slung over their shoulders came on the scene. Holy blades, and with the pair came Ludwig, pleading for the insanity to cease.
No need for conflict. Please, lay down your arms.
One of his companions separated himself from them and brought up the petrified woman. The other remained at Ludwig's side.
But Captain, she's a beast. Can't you tell?
The blooded hunter argued with major confusion.
Do not concern yourself, Ludwig. You should not partake in my work. It just complicates things.
But he's lucid, Eileen. Please. This is not what I thought of your perception of mad hunters. Now both lay down your weapons.
He was both distressed and very authoritarian. Eileen begrudgingly lowered her blade slightly, but the blood-drunk hunter just looked at Ludwig with a hanging jaw, still holding his cleaver firm.
Captain, she's a beast. What has gotten into her?
He stumbled slightly where he stood. Ludwig walked closer to him, which caused Eileen to grow tense with distress. "Ludwig!" she called, but he did not listen, now only a few feet from the man.
Now, put that away. We'll take you home, get you into bed and call on the doctor. Everything will be all right. This is normal. The blood is known to have some side effects now and then.
Like a cornered animal, he held his cleaver up higher in the fence and took a few confused steps back.
What? But no, the blood. Without it, I can never tell man from beast. You must see.
She saw the darkness come into the man's eyes, and as soon as he raised his cleaver higher over his head, in just the span of a short second, just as he was about to bring it down at his oblivious captain, Eileen fired her pistol. The shock from the bullet threw him back and halted his assault entirely. Eileen flew like a raven towards Ludwig and shoved him aside. The only one out of everyone that managed to react was the blood-addled fiend, who let out a scream, partially human, partially beast. She dropped her pistol much quicker than she thought possible, and grabbed hold of the second blade and sliced once at the chest. Another cross cut followed, then another and another. Every streak painted the white robe with an elegant and precise line of crimson. When the torso was all in red, she plunged both blades into the ribcage at the lungs. A sickening, raspy sigh escaped him as he fell backwards. She took hold of the back of his neck and gently lay him down. She left the blades in his chest and put her other hand on his forehead. She held his head so he saw the night sky and the crescent moon. The sigh continued until life left his eyes. Just before it did so, she whispered, "I've shown you the way. Now, soar." Ludwig and the two other hunters came running up at the man's side. Their eyes darted in horrifying astonishment back and forth between their deceased companion and his gentle executioner.
You killed him?
Ludwig sounded utterly surprised, as if he had never seen death before. "I'm sorry you had to see, but this is what can happen. I did warn you."
But he was aware. He was not mad. There must have been a cure. He was just confused.
He tried to attack you. Trust me, he was far gone.
No, I know my men, and he was not far gone. This was unforgivably rash.
She stood hastily after having gently laid his head to the ground.
Excuse me, was this your first time ever seeing this madness? It has been going on for years. I barely believed it when I read it, but my first mark made me convinced. What is preventing you from seeing the same truth?
He did not flinch the slightest at her aggression. His expression only turned more spiteful with every word.
Take him out of the street. Give him a proper burial.
I'm sorry, Ludwig. I really am. There is a reason it has to be me. If you...
Her calmer approach did not curb his distaste, and he lashed out.
You did poorly. A hunter hunts beasts. And though I am well aware of the sickness, and that severe cases cannot be treated, he was not far gone. See that you hunt the right prey, or I'll consider you as such.
He turned and plucked the two blades out of his hunter's chest and tossed them at her feet. They clanged and emitted a few sparks upon impact with the stone. The three of them carried away their fallen, leaving her where she stood. She looked after them as they walked. After a moment, she picked up the blades slowly and meekly. She watched as they vanished into the night, and for the first time, she experienced a genuine fear. There was no honor in slaying the ones that hunted, even though it was an incredible mercy. But she could now see a future where he, Ludwig the Holy Blade, would fall. And if that would come to pass, she was afraid she might not bring herself to carry out her honorless duty. The coffin had its first shovels of dirt poured onto it in its hole. Ludwig turned to look at a few faces around him. Most were hunters. The victim of the hunter of hunters had caused him a severe case of contemplation, which had early on brought about an obscurity of the mind that had yet to release him. Two of the holy blades looked back at him, and he nodded towards the cathedral. With sympathy, they turned and walked back through the graveyard forest. As they went, he noted the amount of graves and their density, as if stacked onto each other around the base of the trees. When had their numbers grown so large? He turned back to the increasingly filling hole. Now no visibility left of the coffin. Perhaps Eileen was right about sky burials. Standing in a forest crowded with the dead, a departure towards the heaven lifted by a giant bird did somehow seem more appealing. He was the last to leave, save for the two men filling the hole. still thinking of Eileen as he walked slowly through the forest. The trees appeared to him unnaturally gloomy in the cloudy weather. Perhaps it was simply his current outlook, but it seemed to him like the dead in the ground cursed all living things through those very trees. He often thought about them and how each death to a beast must surely leave a cursed soul. A soul so angry and fearful that it must indeed bring only ill omens to the world, for all had surely perished to the same scourge. Having pondered much about the beasts and the victims they slew, his mind drifted towards the more strange occurrence in the hunt, namely the madness that took his hunters. What could it possibly be he had done wrong? He knew every one of his hunters, even many of the civilians that too desired a safe town, all upstanding folk with pure virtues. Or perhaps he did not. Perhaps he was more of a fool than he would believe. Would a dignified captain fail to see the madness growing in his wards? No, but a fool would. And perhaps there was something amiss with the Cleric hunters. Perhaps the unification of blood and the hunt caused something to happen to the hunters. Perhaps their sense of ways was the cause. A recklessness brought into the hunt. For who had not heard to fear the old blood? He sensed his mind begin to cloud more denser, causing him to crumple like an old man by the foot of a tree next to a grave with several names he did not acknowledge. There he sat in despair, for he did not know what he could do. He had no answer, and the church seemed as if it was losing its way. The choir was much less communicative and mysterious, leading a proud organization from the shadows. What leader with honor would choose such a path? Then he thought once more of Eileen, specifically of the harsh words he had tossed at her. If only all hunters could pursue their prey with her reverence. For she did indeed seem to care for her prey, wishing only mercy upon them, like it ought to be. But what more could he do to make them all see? He brushed a trembling hand through his dark hair, so that the string that tied it together loosened. How had Master Gehrman done it? Was it that the times were changing? And what was it he did not yet see? Then he was set upon by the familiar tender warmth. The light of the moon shone at him during the day, and he saw the turquoise sprites, one by one, envelop him. They circled around him peacefully like a barrier, emanating from the sword at his back. They calmed his mind, and everything became focused. Perhaps this was how old Gehrman had done it too. Something that sharpened and soothes. He exhaled serenely and stood, like a new man. He knew now that Eileen had done right to give mercy to the man, but he still had a duty to perform. If he was one of the few that truly knew the purpose of the hunt then he must show them, spare them from a horrible, blood-drenched fate. With the moonlight, he would surely endure steeping himself in blood, so that they would not have to. On the distant horizon, partially obscured by 1,000 spires and towers, danced the evening light of the sun with the leading clouds. The town was almost empty, shops closed down, windows being shut and people hurrying home. Henrik observed how many had started to bar their windows with metal, giving the rows of houses a ghastly appearance, though he could not blame them. The street lanterns were being lit, even though the sun's light still shone. But soon there would be no time to light them. Ludwig stood on the steps leading downwards, through a narrow winding decline between the houses. He waved at a hunter remaining behind the grand gate.
Right, close it off.
The giant bars of the cathedral ward gate lowered and separated them from its premise. The seclusion did not bother him, as it was known to do for many others. Likely a homesickness by certain cleric hunters, as they seldom ventured far from the cathedral, or perhaps just bias on his part. Nevertheless, the hunt had begun. They made out a majestic company, with Ludwig at the tip of the spear, his prized greatsword on his back. Next to him, slightly behind, walked Henrik and Fiona, along with a few other old workshop hunters, by virtue of their veterancy. Behind them paraded the Holy Blades, close companions equally experienced as Ludwig. There were, of course, many other hunters operating in smaller and less pompous groups around the town. As they made their way towards the great bridge, people came out of their homes, armed with simple weapons. Some had traditional swords and axes, common in wars of old. Others were armed solely with rifles. None bore the famed trick weapons, as those demanded access to the workshop, which few even know the exact location of. Normally Henrik would of course have preferred to hunt alone, or at least with only his wife as hunting partner. Tonight, however, he would have preferred that Fiona not hunted at all. But she was not a woman anyone could easily sway. They had compromised and settled with the safer approach of hunting in the larger troop. At the great bridge, Ludwig stopped and turned to look upon the setting sun. A mild breeze made his cape flow along it gently. As they stood, more of the populace swarmed to them, eager to take up arms against the scourge.
You have hunted long, Henrik. Longer than I. What say you?
Of what?
The people. Is it right?
Maybe.
Fiona cut into their conversation. Don't you think half of them will just trip and fall on their swords?
That's what I'm asking. Yet, what can we do in such times? I don't like it. But you are right.
Ludwig nodded.
After all, this fight is not entirely my own. I will do everything for this town, and so should anyone that feels the same. I am just me. They will do a better job protecting themselves right by my side.
Henrik let the words ride along the wind and fade, still lingering in his mind. He shot a knowing look at Fiona, conveying his doubts. She rolled her eyes, knowing his thoughts. This place was not for her. The night was truly frightening, and her stubbornness made it all the worse. Since the nights of the hunter's dream, she had had an easier time forgetting, or at least moving past it. But he still felt trapped by it, in a sense. Like he had never awoken at all. When the sun had set, Ludwig turned away and walked to the end of the bridge, having let those that wished to partake do so. A young man came stumbling towards them. He was still tying the arm guards together. On approach, Ludwig greeted him.
Alfred, you came. How is the gear treating you?
It's great, Master Ludwig. Thank you so much for this, for letting me do my part.
Thank me not. Just be sure you make it home to your mother in the morning.
I will. She worries, so it's...
He held up a hand.
I know how they can be. You do what you must. You are a grown lad, after all.
Alfred nodded excitedly, mixed with the nervosity of the novice, and joined their parade. He was a young blonde man, a man that must be on the very cusp of manhood, as his face was still lacking that hard stare and defined feature. Nearly still a boy, but what could be done in these times? It made him all the more nerve-wracked for the night's hunt.
The sun has set. The hunt is on. Steel yourself, brave hunters.
Ludwig called back as they stepped off the bridge and into central Yharnam. They moved onward and walked around the upcoming plaza and continued down the main streets of the wards and districts. The moment when the sun's light had left was the most unnerving. The silence that fell over the houses. The living and breathing body that was Yharnam turned into a cold husk under the moon. Folk were afraid of the night and everything it brought. And although it was primarily the beasts the populace feared, there was that particular respect for hunters that is more fittingly described as fearful. Torches began to be passed on through the crowd. The purpose of their company, other than survivability, was to draw beasts to them. Their taste for flesh knew no bounds, and through frenzied eyes they did not care if they were outnumbered. Inside a few windows, eyes peeked back at them as they passed, but quickly drew the curtains. Soon enough the snarls of beasts sent away the intolerable silence. Henrik could at times see the movement and yellow glow down the darker corners and alleys of the houses. He moved to Fiona's side and walked closer by her.
Relax, dear. 'Tis just another hunt.
She was used to the lack of response.
It is I who should be worried for you. Better to focus on yourself than on me. I have not survived this long on sheer luck.
I know. She sighed.
Yes. But if you're going to continue to be this worried for me, it is you that will slip up.
She added, and Ludwig shot them a curious look. A loud growl erupted in a roar, and two beasts jumped down at them from the adjacent rooftops. The civilians reacted poorly by stumbling backwards and almost tripping themselves, not entirely accustomed to the speed of the hunts. Luckily for them, and unfortunately for the beasts, they had targeted the holy blades. The white-garbed warriors with shining gauntlets and sabatons had already sprung into motions upon the first note of the abhorrent sound, stepping out of the way slightly while plunging their silver swords into the sheath on their backs. Like magnificent statues coming to life, they paused for just a brief moment before swinging their transformed greatswords from their backs, catching the beasts in the air as they came leaping down. A well-practiced and often used tactic, one could tell. One of the giant blades cleaved through the ghoulish body that landed with a wet thud onto the ground. The other was simply thrown by the force and was quick to stand back on its four limbs, with a streak of blood being tossed from it. The composed man was elegantly quick to pursue the beast, and swung with the greatsword in a manner suggesting it to be much lighter than it seemed. The broad and ornate blade swept through the air and chased the beast. It leapt to the man's side, but as refined as a dance, he stepped along the swoop of the blade, and as the beast lunged at him, he placed one simple step forward, turned around and brought it down, having just been missed by the momentum of the beast. The sword cleaved through the back of its neck, bringing the body to an immediate halt down into the stone road. Blood now partially tarnished the purity of their robe and mantle. They did not seem to bother the slightest. Ludwig was merely peeking over his shoulder at the scene, while the townspeople nodded and complimented, somewhat professionally. Their excitement clearly covered by their awe. Henrik was pleased by seeing his wife's disappointment for missing the action. Their journey met many similar encounters. They too were mostly handled by the Holy Blades, with small fire support from the populace. They all proved themselves as the adept beast slayers the town knew them as, being the quickest to act and having already dispatched the threats before any of the civilians had the guts to intervene. But undoubtedly was the fact that it all came from watching Ludwig, who doggedly threw himself at any threat, willingly separating himself from the herd to meet any malicious creature that emerged from the shadows. Right after him were Henrik and Fiona, while the Holy Blades remained as sentinel over the troop. It was these incidents that truly riled the citizens and inspired some adaptation to the hunters' tactics. At least in the means of flanking and be as light on their feet as they could. The painful truth that few armored protections held against the scourge were yet to sink in, but it was a slow and horrific truth to process for the masses. The beasts grew numerous further into the night. Before there had been the image of a dead town, now from its carcass had maggots begun to writhe in the form of beasts, delighting and freely roaming the streets and spreading terrible howls as they went. When they weren't languishing in their prey's blood, they roamed aimlessly, lacking the intelligence to call it a hunt, but retaining an incoherent sense of purpose that animated them to search for more, all while under a crimson spell of the most unthinkable states of wrathful mania. Still Ludwig sent himself forth, with a mighty and marvellous greatsword held aloft, followed by Henrik and Fiona, and further after, the entire group descended like a jaw of a snake. When they had passed the majority of Knacker's Lane, about halfway on their march around Yarnam, Ludwig stopped unceremoniously. It quickly became apparent why. He tilted his head slightly and listened, as did Henrik, and he could, very dampened, hear a sound. The sound of other hunters, and very near. Very faintly, the quick stepping of feet, weapons impacting on flesh and the splatter of blood. But no roars and sighs of the beast. It was difficult to distinguish between the murmuring townspeople and their smattering torches. But even still, it was obvious only a hunter swung a weapon like that. But against who? He looked at Fiona, who shared his confusion. Ludwig just remained as if paralyzed. The steps grew fewer. The clashing and scarce shots of pistols grew less frequent. A fight coming to its end, but with no sounds of beasts. Out of nowhere, and completely unmotivated, came the most horrific and ear-piercing screech. It made his blood freeze and forget his breathing as the sound in an instant took him back to old Yarnam, where the beast had towered high under the red moon and killed everything in sight. Within that scream lay all the fears he ever had for the scourge. All the fears he every day had to shut away in order to hunt, now came to overwhelm him. The worried voices that bordered on panic from the civilians became unfocused as he lost himself in his mind and his memories. The giant thing that had tumbled into a square and flailed with giant arms, smashing humans into bloody pulps. Things he still saw in his dreamless sleep. A hand found his. A hand he knew well, and he looked to see Fiona stare back at him. Her compassion slowly took over, like a sunrise over a harrow night's darkness. Stay with me here, okay? He nodded, free from woes. He was indeed a lucky one, for it was somehow easier to fight for someone else than for himself. The scream's culmination of the shrill roar was accompanied by a loud bang and the crashing of stone. This sent Ludwig into action, gripping his blade. He ran towards the street corner where the left would have taken them off from Accursed Lane, and the right would eventually lead to the Yarnam countryside. He was so quick and abrupt that a gap grew between him and the group, as the rest soon started to follow. What came out to meet Ludwig from the right corner had them all instinctively stop. Jumping into the middle of the street was at first sight just a clump of fur of giant proportions. As the thing turned towards Ludwig, it was revealed that the mass of black had been a grossly overgrown left arm. The arm was about the same length as the creature itself, which stood ferociously proud about 20 feet in height. A hideous head with contorted horns looked down at the church captain. It stood before him on long, narrow and agile legs, folded and crouched. Its head was a confusing bundle of chaotically growing horns. He drew his blade, and a powerful, brief turquoise spark of light came upon it as it left his back. The monster had only stopped briefly and now roared at its prey. Down came its brutish arm, and Ludwig swung his blade to the side, following along and avoiding the slam, then spun around and with the momentum cleaved down into it. It did not visibly seem to do much, but it made the beast let out a hideous roar once more. Fiona and Henrik were spurred into action, closely followed by the holy blades. Surprisingly, out from the same corner in pursuit of the beast came two figures. One dressed entirely in black with a flowing cape resembling black feathered wings, synonymous with a hunter of hunters. The other looked ragged in clothing, but nimble enough to be a hunter, wielding a strangely curved sword. Still focused on Ludwig, it swiped with its giant arm at him. He leapt away, darting towards its rear, and slashed with the blade upwards as he passed, into the side of its legs. It immediately, unflinchingly, swiped back at him with its smaller, but proportionally correct right arm. The two figures behind it moved in and vanished behind its large frame. Despite their comparatively small stature, whatever harm they inflicted caused the thing to reel somewhat and look their way. Fiona took the moment of distraction to throw a Molotov as it moved towards them. The ragged long fur was set ablaze and burned briefly. Its unending screeching howl would never be silenced, as the frenzy of the creature was bottomless. When it did not howlingly shriek, it emitted a low, high-pitched groan, somewhat similar to a mad rooster that tried to mimic a dog's growl. To Henrik's astonishment, he saw the young lad Alfred run into the fray amongst the holy blades. His confidence truly matched that of a stalwart white-garbed hunter, even if his skill did not, and they flanked the giant brute by running past it and closer to the street corner. The beast in a frenzy slammed both hands into the ground, then made an impressive leap into the air, higher than one would imagine its size could allow. Everyone scattered as it descended right onto the body of one of the holy blades. He was crushed instantly. Arrows flew through the air and pierced its back, fired by the ragged hunter, who now was wielding a strange form of bow. Despite their meager damage, the arrows proved frustrating enough for it to turn towards them with a backhand sweep of its monstrous hand. Henrik felt a bit redundant, as it was hard to land an attack with his cleaver, as it moved very dexterously with its sweeping claws. The many hunters was also contributed to the dilemma, but Fiona was adamant to take her part, and rushed in as soon as it turned its back and started to hack furiously at its legs. It did make it stumble, though perhaps not for their benefit, as its reaction was to throw itself forward. He saw how Ludwig, the Black Hunter, and everyone else in front of it was forced to leap away from the tumble. Even Alfred managed to avoid it quite well. But now it was rather angry and disturbed by the thorn in its heel. It stood up and in a single motion spun around with an overhead slam. Both Henrik and Fiona were prepared and jumped back, but Fiona was still dangerously close. He reacted without thought, stepping in quick as the wind. He grabbed her shoulder and pulled her back as it reached for her with its jaws, attached to a terrible head with no other coherent features other than the chaotic bundle of antlers and a cruel maw. He fired his pistol right in its face. It did little, and it threw its head to the sides, making its horns impact with him. He felt his body lift from the ground, stay in the air for a quick moment, then impact with hard stone. Everything was black from the moment the horns impacted hard and painfully. When he opened his eyes again, he still could not see, but instead of darkness, a blinding light obscured his sight. As it receded, Ludwig came into view, standing firm with the moonlight blade jammed partially up into the lower jaw of the beast. The blade was now glowing like a star, a beacon of moonlight, and the edge had even widened by flowing celestial light. It screamed and flailed its arms aimlessly as the blade pierced deeper. The light shined bright out of its horrid maw. Eventually the radiant tip of the blade pierced through the head and the scream subsided. The rest of the body tensed and twitched before limply slumping down. The light faded, and before Henrik could observe the captain retrieve his sword, Fiona's distressed visage came into view.
"Gods damn it, Henrik!"
she shouted, leaning in to sit him up against the wall he had collided with. She felt around his body for any wounds. His right side was ailing from the impact, but in his current state, he did not detect any cause for major worry.
I would have handled it fine myself.
Perhaps, yes. But then again...
Oh, stop it. I know. No more hunts. I give up.
He took some effort to make it up in a proper position. He sat straight up against the wall and she sat down on her knees in front of him, visibly relieved.
I understand it must be strange for you, but it's not just about you anymore.
I know, dear. But it's always been just me. It's hard. She slumped over to lean back against the same wall, laying both hands over her stomach. It's hard to... I don't know. It's easier just to hunt. I'm such a fool. I can't just bear the weight. He laid his own hand over hers.
I know, but you can do it. For both of us.
I guess so. For the three of us. The hunt was on, yet folk insisted on acting on trivial delights. Simon frowned, watching a merry pair, overindulged on cocktails, stumble over the street. He contemplated leaving them to their vices, the fact of the reigning scourge having slipped their minds. But such thoughts he only humoured briefly, lest he could not call himself a professional. Hey there. You know the sun will be setting soon. He inquired much more politely than he truly felt. Oh yeah? The man looked on the horizon, then back at him. He had that look one would expect of someone being told their business by a beggar. A dumbfounded, open-mouthed smile. Right. You mean to say the hunt is soon upon us? I'll let them come, the woman continued. It's a hunt! Taking a bit of holy essence beforehand, you know? She slurred, and Simon rolled his eyes at their misplaced enthusiasm. See here. You ought to have imbibed proper blood, not that of delight, to survive a hunt. He pulled aside his tattered coat to reveal his own stash of blood vials, strapped to a leather belt circling his torso. Knowingly tugging at his coat so the church-issued blade would be slightly revealed. They recognized the craft and lost their smiles and demeanor. Now it's my job to see the beasts go without dinner tonight. Might I follow you to your home? They both brushed themselves off and straightened themselves. You may, the man said, trying to piece together his shattered dignity. You live far from here? No, just follow me. They trod past with their hands in their coat pockets. It made him regret his ill-willed thoughts against them before, regardless of how sincere they had been. They did not converse on the way, and luckily for them, it was but a few streets distance. Walking down the lit-up lane, with the lanterns already burning, the sun's light grew fainter. Shadows stretched further and further on the ground until they were no more. Night had fallen upon their arrival. Simon was delighted to confirm they were not entirely a pair of eggheads, as they possessed the sensibility to bar their windows and keep incense urns to mask their scent. He knew for a fact that it helped. At least to the degree that beasts would move on to easier hunting grounds when they found their entry slightly halted.
I wish you a good night. Take care of each other now.
You too. Good hunting. His farewell was not loaded with concern. He knew they felt little for the hunters, who reminded them of their dark times. Turning and peering up at the moon, he heard the first distinct howls of the fiends as they started a hunt of their own. Ludwig must already be engaged with them, together with his brave holy blades. He stuck to the shadows and moved towards Knacker's lane. Clearly, as if deliberately, he saw someone running along the rooftops. The moon shined right behind the figure, making it quite the remarkable scenery as he or she jumped nimbly. What astonished him the most was the elegant cape flowing behind like wings. He started to run along the ground, alternating between looking in front for beasts and glancing up at a moonlit silhouette. Inevitably, the figure made a final jump over a tilted rooftop and disappeared. His sprint slowed, and he caught himself staring. He listened for a moment to only find every sound being very distant. He ran towards the house row exterior and jumped to grab the decorative roof edge crowning a doorway. From that, onto a stone windowsill and along the drain up to the steep roof. It all went efficiently quickly, but judging from the enigmatic person's movement, they outmatched him by far. He found the winged runner perched on a balcony, scanning the streets below. It turned towards him just as he looked over the roof's edge, having heard his approach. A beaked mask glared back at him. He knew it to be synonymous with the secretive hunter of hunters, and slightly regretted his pursuit.
What are you doing up here? Few beasts hunt the roofs.
Well, I...
Get down here, boy, and keep quiet.
A woman's voice hushedly commanded him to sit beside her, pointing firmly with a finger. He leapt down quietly.
I'm Simon, a harrowed hunter. Eileen, hunter of hunters. Spotted any prey? I have, but I doubt you should stick around. I know it. But I have seen my share of horrors in the face of men. You know what a harrowed hunter does? A spy hunter.
She continuously kept her beak directed out towards the illuminated streets.
Well, sure, that's one way to put it. But what I mean is, do you know how many blood-drunk people I've encountered? The public don't see them that well, but I noticed them rather quickly, and boy, are they a danger. Though I have never encountered a hunter. Truthfully, I only thought it hearsay. Do you take the blood? Doesn't everybody?
She sniggered.
Truly. Just keep your wits about you and remember what's truly important. And what might that be?
Only now did she briefly look away and towards him. He could not see any eyes behind the dark mask.
To keep quiet.
He blushed slightly, and Eileen directed her beak back towards the small squaric plaza with a round plantage in the middle, hosting a soul tree. Turning the corner from one of 3 adjoining streets overseen by them, came a group of church hunters, 4 of them, 2 of which held torches.
Shite. A bit more than I had thought. What do you mean?
She did not answer. Simon did not find anything peculiar with them. Many such troops were scattered around Yarnam on a hunt. Perhaps that there was a slight fumble in their steps, but nothing past the typical fatigue of a recent hunt. Eileen rose up slowly, not standing completely.
Well, harrowed hunter, who knows the dark parts of the hunt, I might need your aid. Them? Are you certain? I have done this for some time now. Now if you are so hard-gutted, then help me dispatch these, or get out of here. This is not your regular hunting trip.
She left their concealment with grace, letting herself fall off out of his view. Simon did not think long of it, and admittedly was partially taunted into it. He drew his blade and flicked out the mechanism that folded the blade into 2, the second mirroring the former in the shape of a bow. Just as he saw them see her, he drew a solid arrow of metal and lay it in his bow. He had been frightfully nervous since he first saw the beaked mask turn his way. The concept of people becoming addled was not strange in the slightest, but he liked to think better of hunters, especially holy blades. The 4 white-garbed hunters began to walk more strangely, having now seen Eileen. The longer he held on to the arrow, the more he began to fear the thought about actually utilizing it. At times he had witnessed that transformation right before his eyes. Initially he pictured that man becoming beast would be slow, and not the violent erupting blood and growing limbs that it was. However, the scene right before him looked like he had once imagined it. He saw it in their steps, how they marched proudly, but started having jitters upon seeing the crow. their gait increased and their posture was slightly hunched, like a pack of wolves circling their prey. They retained the guise of a man, but their behavior made him draw the arrow in his bow. The crow stood still and collected. They spoke something. First did the church hunter blur out something incomprehensible, a taunt of some kind. The voice of Eileen sounded even lower, more like a faint tone playing in the background. Suddenly one of them had drawn a sword and swung towards her in a lurching motion, not at all befitting a noble hunter. The dread vanished. He had swallowed it. The stage had been set, and there was only one sensible action he could make. He fired his arrow. It struck itself into the top of the shoulder of the sword-wielding arm. He managed only to lay a hand over the wound with a giant metal rod protruding out, before Eileen flew upon him and sliced with 2 daggers, creating streaks of starlight as they brought out more and more blood from the man. The 3 companions each contributed to a cacophony of wild noise that was a bastardization of a vocal rallying cry, being now right on the verge of the sound, only made by a beast, and they drew their weapons. He left the shadows, and a bit more carefully than Eileen, jumped off the edge and onto a lower rooftop. From there the drop was shorter straight down to the street where the fight had already begun. He saw how Eileen slammed away the mad hunter's blow with both her 2 elegant daggers and sliced at the attacker's face. Indeed, only one frenzied by something inhuman would still stand to fight after having a blade paint a crimson line over one's face. He loosened another arrow at them from a kneed stance. It was avoided by the one furthest back, who had managed to see its travel and hunched down. The man now looked towards him into the darkness, and charged, while Eileen expertly handled 2 hunters on her own. Simon clenched back the bow together to form the blade, making the 2 halves meet. In the same moment he thrusted the thing forward, making the hunter dodge to the right. Simon spun after him, slicing once while moving into a pirouette, and slicing once again as he finished it. It was the latter attack that caught his opponent in the side, as his dodging was not sufficient. In frustration, the crazed man fired a load from his blunderbuss. It went way off, but he did not hesitate with slamming his sword into the greatsword hilt at his back and bringing the whole operation down at him. He was now positioned rather awkwardly to dodge the thick blade, and he fell backwards into a roll. The crazed man walked closer and with every step brought the blade down onto the stone like he was hacking meat. Simon crawled backwards a few feet before he rolled to the side and swung as he got up onto his knees. The slice had enough momentum that cut the foot clean off. With an infuriating groan the man tumbled down, and Simon was not to hesitate with stabbing the forward falling man into the back of the neck. He did not properly confirm the departure of his adversary. Instead he stumbled forward towards Eileen. She was in the middle of fulfilling a kick into one of her assailant's chests, which sent him reeling backwards. One other came up on the right, and she just managed to duck and step under his downward swing. She now stood beside him, where she plunged one dagger into his side, the other in his back. His body stiffened, and she forced him in between her and the other blood-drunk hunter. He dropped his weapon and tried with one hand to reach his back. She removed the dagger in his side and swiftly moved it up to his throat. The blood sprayed ridiculously as he was lowered to the ground. The remaining hunter backed away from the light of the street. He walked very silly, stumbling, seemingly overrun with fright. Simon approached right behind Eileen, but allowed her to lead the advance on him. He noticed how the cornered hunter's breath increased both in frequency and volume. He swiped at her as one would imagine a cornered wolf would have. Then, things happened very quickly. His breathing stopped, and in the next moment, he witnessed a raw force overcome the hunter, accompanied by a large, screeching roar. Blood and darkness erupted from the body, and both of them were sent flying onto their backs. At first he stared up into the night sky, but quickly looked back towards the figure when a loud crash echoed in the night. A colossal lump of fur and a spiraling, winding horn formation stood afore him. The horns turned up to reveal a hideous head, deprived from any visible features, other than a jawed grin supposed to be its muzzle. It stood upright, head towards the sky, and roared. It jumped towards them. A giant hand armed with claws swung over them as they still lay on the ground. It then turned to strike down at them, forcing them to roll away from a deafening crash of stone. Perhaps still induced by some sort of fright, it turned and moved away to the next street. It made an incredible jump away from them, and both him and Eileen were quick on their feet to take pursuit.
Pungent blood cocktail. Mature blood cocktail that releases a pungent odor when thrown that attracts bloodthirsty beasts. A precious tool in sadly short supply. In Yarnam, they produce more blood than alcohol, as the former is more intoxicating.